Hello and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Edward's Night Show. Right, let's see what will go wrong tonight. Speaking of which, tonight's guest. Is it another summon guest, or do they actually have to use the door? Tonight's guest actually has to use the door. Yes, Skulls. Now then, last year around this time, or episode, we had to deal with bats. Luckily this year, we don't. After last year, we got a skeleton crew to clean up everything. Litter. And, oi! Get your bony butt back to the other side of the house. No, I don't care if you're supposed to be cleaning up in here. Come back after the night show and clean then. Go! I'm firing you. Thank you. They really weren't kidding when they said skeletons don't have brains. Speaking of which, we really need to do a lore video about you and how you act like you have a brain but don't actually have one since, you're just as much bone as they are. Agreed. But, to be frank, I don't even know how I act like I have one. Wish I knew. It'd make things a whole lot easier. Well, anyways, now we move on to tonight's story, which is... Don't buy dented cans. Interesting story. Never heard of this one before. Have you, Skulls? No. Then again, I've never heard of any of these stories. You're the one with the book most times. True. I started a job at a canned vegetable company last month. It has been easy, but a boring job, at least up until yesterday, that is. On day one, I was shown around the factory. My supervisor gave me a walk through the entire factory. I saw each department and was given a brief description of what they do there. What is this, Wonka's shop for vegetables? That would be a terrible shop. Well, it wasn't so terrible back then when we were alive. True. At the end of the day, I was told to come back the next day at 8 a.m. I was going to start in the boxing department, the last step in the factory. What, do they box their canned vegetables? No, that's an impossible quiz joke. Speaking of which, should we start a gaming channel? That's a different story for a different day. Fair. All I had to do was pull each case of canned goods off the conveyor belt, ensure it was sealed, and placed it on the pallet. It sounded easy enough. What about that room over there? I asked, pointing to a room with fogged windows. I could see conveyor belts going into it and coming out of it, but unlike the rest of the facility, it was closed off. All the windows were fogged, so you couldn't see inside. My boss sighed and gave me a look that told me he was tired of people asking about that room. That room is off limits. Only restricted personnel are allowed in there. The next morning, I started my shift. About an hour into my shift, I was bored out of my mind. The box came down the conveyor belt. I sealed it and stacked it on the pallet. Another box, sealed it, pallet. I needed a break. I waved at my supervisor and told him I need to use the bathroom break. He checked his wash. I mean, he does need to go to the bathroom, so a wash is not particularly out of the question. Touché. Where were we? No. He looked at his watch and shook his head. Already, he asked in a frustrated tone. I'm sorry, nature calls, I replied. He stepped over to my conveyor belt. I'll cover you until you get back. Just try to be quick. He snapped. You did not sound very snappy reading that. I'm sorry, I'm reading this. I don't really get the tone until they say the tone. I'm sorry. I walked to the bathroom and turned to make sure he was out of my line of sight. He was. I didn't have to use the bathroom, and stood in front of the bathroom for a second. That's when I heard the noise. I heard horrible retching noises, like someone was throwing up. But the noises weren't coming from the restroom. They were coming from the room with the fogged windows. I began to creep closer. The noises were becoming louder. When I reached the door, I cupped my hands over the grass. I cupped my hands over the grass. What grass? You mean the leaves that we're busy packing into the cans? Sure, yes, that type of grass. I don't know. You've had too much wine again, haven't you? Just a touch. Speaking of which, I must say it is a rather good vintage of wine. I have to say, it does get better with age. You say that and then you cough up a storm. Not this time. Got a new batch. Still old, but new batch. Now then, where were we? When I reached the door, I cupped my hands over the glass to try to look inside. Someone had to have seen me, and then the door opened. I almost fell backwards, but I was able to recover. A middle-aged man wearing the same uniform I had been given stood there staring at me. "You must be Brett, the new guy. You were supposed to be here an hour ago," he said. The retching sounds were even louder, now that the door was open. I could hear other people talking inside the room. I wasn't Brett, but I needed to see what was going on. I knew that when my supervisor noticed I didn't come back, I would be fired. Or worse, if Brett showed up and they figured out I was lying, I would be in serious trouble. It was worth it, though. I hated this job anyway. The man brought me into the room. He pointed to the conveyor belt that led into the machine. "The cans will come in this side. The machine will seal them. They will come along the other side, sealed with a label. Your job is to make sure they are sealed. If you see any leaking, pull them and place them in this barrel, okay?" I nodded. It was simple. I wanted to look around to see what was causing the noise, but the cans began flowing in. Cans of peas were moving into the machine and coming out sealed. I watched them for several minutes and didn't see any that failed to seal. But I did notice all of them were dented. I decided to turn and ask the man, "What do we do with these cans?" It would be the perfect excuse to look around the room. As I turned the corner, a large piece of equipment. Wow, I cannot read. No, it's just the writing. I don't think this one particularly speaks English when they wrote it. Yeah, I think I'm gathering that. Ooh. Where was I? As I turned the corner, I saw a large piece of equipment. A huge green insect was standing there. It was easily 6-7 feet tall and resembled a praying mantis. The creature was chained to the floor and vomiting violently into 55-gallon barrels. 2 men were scooping the vomit and pouring small amounts of it into each can of peas that passed by. It screamed in disgust. I screamed in disgust, not it. It's screaming for a different reason. I just screamed in disgust. The man who led me into the room turned to me. He ran over and began yelling at me. "You need to get back to your station. If one of those cans get through unsealed, it could ruin everything. Within hours of being exposed to the air, the eggs can hatch," he screamed at me. "Eggs? What the fuck is this thing?" I demand. "Fuck, Tom didn't brief you before he sent you down here, did he?" he asked. I said nothing. I just stared in horror at the giant insect. "Yeah, eggs. This thing's an alien, not an insect. It's an alien. I don't know the difference. We had an arrangement with their species. It stays here, legs heads, and we spray them around through the few change. Few. Go away from me. I few you. What is wrong with you? Again, too much wine. It's been a bad night here. We have an arrangement with their species. It stays here, lays eggs, and we spread them through the food chain. We estimate about 1 in 100 eggs that are consumed by humans will hatch. Consuming the human from within," he explained. "Why do you do this?" I asked. I wanted to puke. The huge insect was staring at me while it continued to vomit. "Brett, you were supposed to have been up to speed already. We don't have a choice. They supply us with tech, and we have to offer hosts to incubate their offsprings. The cans are dented, so we can track how many we put into circulation. And at least the only people that will be lost are poor people or cheap people looking for a bargain," he told me. That was it. I couldn't hold back anymore. I ran to the trash can and vomited. The man patted me on the shoulder. "Brett, I need you to get back to your station. Besides, it's not half as bad as what they're doing with the corn." Yeah, okay, yeah, don't buy the dented cans. Don't buy the dented cans. That's just a lesson for life. Don't ever buy anything that's dented. Yeah, don't ever buy anything that's dented. That's just a horrible idea. Ugh. Nope. No. Nope. I absolutely hate it. Alright. Well, now that story's done, a rather interesting one. This year seems to be full of interesting stories. We now move on to tonight's interview, which is with Mr. Frankenstein. Wait. Is it Frankenstein or Frankenstein? And isn't the doctor called Frankenstein? If that's the case, then what's this monster called? I'm called Frank. Hi! Oh, well, that's a surprise. You can actually speak. In most media, you can't speak. Rather surprised me. Ah, well, that's understandable. For a long time, me and my wife couldn't speak. The dear doctor ended up finding a way to give us a more functional brain, which allowed us to speak, at least somewhat. Learning new languages, on the other hand, not so much. I see. Well, I assume you're still terrified of fire, right? Oh, yes, quite. Why is that, if I may ask? Well, in honesty, I don't know. It's like an instinct, I guess. That, and the dear doctor said something along the lines of, I'm flammable, or something like that. Due to the chemicals inside me, or something to that degree. I can't quite remember. I see. Well, how do you think life is, being born, so to speak, out of basically nothing except spare body parts? Well, so far, I've enjoyed it. And the dear doctor was ecstatic, till he passed due to an illness. Oh, I am so sorry for your loss. No, it's fine. Time happens, and I've moved on. Still miss him, though. Speaking of which, anything else, or am I free to go? After all, the wife was preparing dinner before I arrived. Right, yes, you are free to go. Thank you for coming here tonight, Frank. Go out that door and you'll be returned right back to your house. Should we tell him that his whole cottage burns down, killing him and his wife, and a few of his kids in it? Nah, I'd say let him enjoy the time he has left. You know, it's a rather sad life. Constantly feared by everyone just because they're different, like us. Anyways, that concludes tonight's episode of the Edwards Night Show. We hope you've all enjoyed, and we'll see you tomorrow night. And remember, when the moon is full and it shines its light, that is when the night is true. Good night, everyone. And the stemmer of the worship. Das haben sie es mir offen, das ist so noch illusion. Was a pet skiss up, evil walking. Sir shall see her member. Her left nose papers and her own summer said. Severus and her eye up. Annas hat sie nicht sind. Sie ruht sie in das Earth breakfast dark sie. Feel abuser. Anna. Sie ruht sie. Wie sie durch eine Obietzitz. Wie sie auf Basel Rose. Oh, we know.